everyone. So, it's important to do things that make you feel good and that are good for your physical and mental health. When I say that I hate self care, I'm not talking about people taking care of themselves. I'm talking specifically about the culture surrounding self care and the ways that self care is often presented. A lot of times, self care is presented as either a substitute for what we really want or as the means to some kind of productivity. First, let's talk about the substitute. Many times when people have advised me to do self care, it was in place of solving a problem, talking about what was wrong, or getting support from others. The first time this happened was in college. Now, college was an awful experience for me, and I knew early on that I didn't like it there and I wanted to go home. There was nothing that would have made staying at my college acceptable. But rather than getting validation for leaving, I was told to do self care rituals, which would get me through moments when I was upset, but would not do anything to improve the overall circumstance. Using self care rituals in college made things worse for me because the goal of the self care was to push through and stick it out rather than recognizing that the situation was unacceptable and leaving. So, in more recent years, I've had a very serious goal to spend a lot more time with people and have more hugs and care and emotional support. I can't tell you how many times I have been pushed to use self care techniques to fight loneliness instead of actually working on finding a way to be with my friends and family more often and to have more physical affection. Self care sort of feels like the I can't believe it's not butter, except the butter in this case is affection, support, and time spent with others. I have been told to get pets, stuffed animals, bath bombs, frozen peas, everything except actual time with other people. When I was in DBT class, which is dialectical behavior therapy, I wasted tons of time doing self soothe rituals that meant nothing to me when I should have been working on solving my problem and figuring out how to see people I love every day. Additionally, many of the self soothe rituals that I learned in this class resulted in me appearing more okay than I actually felt. Since I'm looking to have more emotional support from others when I'm feeling bad, anything that weakens that distress signal is counterproductive. Self care often feels like part of the societal pressure to be independent and okay on your own and not relying on emotional support from other people. That is definitely not the kind of life I want to live. And finally, in the short time that I was doing full DBT, I was pressured to do self care rituals that meant nothing to me in place of getting to talk about my problems. I kept saying that all I wanted to do was talk about what was wrong. I kept saying that the biggest part of my trauma is the fact that I never got to talk about it. But instead of getting to talk about it finally, I was told that I had to artificially get rid of the bad feelings I was having by performing self care rituals, which left me feeling empty and hopeless and like I would never get to talk about what was wrong. Now, thankfully, my therapist recognized that this wasn't working, and we eventually switched to a different form of therapy where I would actually process trauma. But the self care rituals we did in the beginning were not worth it. The only self care that I'm down with is care that coexists with solving problems and getting emotional support from others. It needs to be in addition to both of those things without being a substitute for either. A supplement, not a substitute. So the other issue I have with self-care is as when it's presented as the means to an unrelated end. I hear this often in corporate or activist settings or any kind of setting where the focus is some kind of work you're doing, either for a company or for others. Self care gets thrown around as something that you should do so that you're able to be more productive. Like it's not okay to simply do something that brings you pleasure because you want a life full of pleasure. It has to be for the purpose of making you more productive at what really matters. I ran into this a lot in college. People referring to everything fun as simply a break to recharge for studying or for being involved in things, like it wasn't okay to just have fun for its own sake. Now, when I was in high school, we had these constant budget cuts, and there was always a threat of our theater program being cut. When fighting to keep our programs, I often heard the argument that the arts help students to do better at their academic classes. While I understand that this was a good strategy for arguing in favor of the arts, I always hated this argument. Theater was the most important thing to me because I loved it, and it needed to stay at our school just because we loved it, not because it enhanced our performance at other things. That's what the self care movement often feels like to me. The things that make me feel happy and energized and fulfilled are the most important things in my life. And they're important because they make me happy, not because they enhance my ability to do anything else. This idea of self care feels like a part of the productivity culture, taking things that make you feel good and turning them into a way to be more productive. When encouraging people to take time for themselves, you sometimes hear this phrase, you can't pour from an empty cup. Now, I agree with that, but at the same time, what if you don't want to pour from your cup? I mean, what if you just like having a nice full cup because it feels good, not because you plan to do something that will empty it? What if you like to feel happy and energized and fulfilled just for the sake of feeling that way, not because you plan to do anything that will use up that energy? The only self care that I'm down with treats feeling good as the end goal without any expectation that feeling good will lead to increased productivity. So, again, I'm all for taking care of yourself and doing things that make you feel good physically and emotionally. But the only self care that I'm on board with is self care that treats feeling good as an end goal and not the means to productivity, and that coexists with problem solving, talking about what's wrong, getting out of bad situations, and caring for each other.